Hey class, it's Professor G here, and today I want to begin with a bit of a thought experiment. Now I want you to imagine this scenario. Suppose you're taking a stroll late one night, and out of the darkness suddenly a man pops out and puts a knife to you and says, "Quick, tell me what the two most important events in history are." What would you say? Perhaps you would think about it a bit and say, well, I'm taking American history right now, maybe the American Revolution, or maybe the Civil War. The guy says, think bigger. I'm talking about world history. What are the two most important events in world history? What would you say? Now, I think there are two answers to this. I think there are two pretty straightforward answers to this that would be a safe bet to escape that situation if someone holds you at knife point and asks you these questions. And I may or may not do this on the weekend, but don't hold me to it. So, what would you say? I would say that there are two straightforward answers, two answers that would easily get you out of the situation that most historians agree upon. Two events that most historians would point to and say, yeah, this is the event. This is the two biggest events that have happened. Even historians that don't really work in that field, like me, I'm interested in the history of ideas, the history of science, the history of philosophy, that sort of thing. But even I would concede that these two events are, as far as the impact on humanity goes, as far as like the everyday impact, that these two events are undoubtedly the two most important events. So I want to introduce this lecture by talking about the first event, and then we'll get to the actual PowerPoint, the PowerPoint containing the second event. So what's the first event? The first most important event in human history, I would say, would be the Neolithic Revolution. And I have a lot of really smart people that would agree with me. The Neolithic Revolution. Now you're probably thinking to yourself at this point, what the hell is that? Neolithic Revolution occurs around 10,000 BC, about 12,000 years ago. And the Neolithic Revolution marks a fundamental transition in the day-to-day life of human beings. We have a shift from a primarily hunting and gathering-based society to a society and culture centered around agriculture and pastoralism. Pastoralism being the care for animals, so like herding animals. So a shift from nomadic life to a settled life. You can't really be nomadic and work on a farm. Okay, you have to be there constantly. Your presence is required year-round to maintain this farm. So the Neolithic Revolution occurs about 10,000 BC, and one of the amazing facts, one of many amazing facts about the Neolithic Revolution, is that it occurs worldwide, roughly around the same time. So in 10,000 BC, people in South Africa, Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, India, give or take a few thousand years, okay, people all around the globe start farming, start agricultural production, start domesticating and herding animals. So Neolithic Revolution first event occurs about 10,000 BC, and there are two distinctive aspects of the Neolithic Revolution, which I've already mentioned. The first is the domestication of plants. This is modern day agriculture, the domestication of plants. And the second is the domestication of animals. So the two key characteristics of the Neolithic Revolution, first of all, we have the domestication of plants. Now we don't quite know how or why this happened, but somewhere along the line, some lady in the far distant past figured out that if she took a seed and she planted it in the ground, and if she waited in that spot long enough, a new plant would spring up. Now we don't quite know who this was or when this occurred, and I say it was a she because most likely it was a woman, because the women would do the gathering while the men were out doing the hunting, typically speaking. So sometime around 10,000 BC, the first person planted a seed in the ground and realized that if they planted these seeds, that the plants themselves would eventually spring up. Next, you have the domestication of animals, beginning with the dog about 15,000 BC. Around 10,000 BC, you have the domestication of herd animals such as sheep, goats. Eventually, you get cattle, camels in the Middle East, llamas in South America. So, why does this matter? Why is this one of the most important events in human history? It's one of the most important events in human history because we transition from a nomadic lifestyle, human beings wandering around, typically following herds of animals, to a settled lifestyle centered around agriculture. And this is going to have a tremendous effect, because for the very first time in human history, we'll have a surplus of food. We'll be able to grow more food than we could eat. Hunting and gathering lifestyles are typically hand to mouth. Whatever food you find for that day is typically the food you eat, and usually you don't find more food than you could eat for that day, or more food than you could share with your family or extended family or your tribe. So hunting and gathering lifestyle, you find some fruits, you find some nuts. Perhaps the men have a successful hunt that day, perhaps they don't. The income of food is unstable. Okay, you can't predict how much food you're going to be able to gather for that day. And so typically speaking, because of this, human populations were relatively small. However, with the development of agriculture, human populations increase. So with the domestication of plants, these small farming villages, as soon as you have a food surplus, what happens? You have a population increase. More food, as I like to say, more food equals more babies. More babies equals a larger population. So you go from these small villages to these small towns, from these small towns to cities, and eventually once you reach a certain level of complexity, once you reach a certain level of population growth and agricultural production and sophistication in society, okay, because eventually once you hit a certain level, not everybody has to be a farmer. This frees people up to do other things, such as making pottery, making tools, whatever. So once you reach a certain level of sophistication, civilization emerges. And civilization is the great accelerator of change. And let me explain what I mean by that. All right, I'm going to draw a very, very brief and reductionistic historical timeline. So bear with me here. I'm not a great artist. Okay, so human beings first emerge on the plains of Africa anywhere from 200,000 to 150,000 BC. So these are going to be our human beings. This will be your ancestors here standing with their awesome spears. So human beings first emerge on the plains of Africa about, we'll say 150,000 BC, just to keep it simple. Around 150,000 BC. By 10,000 BC, you have the Neolithic Revolution. 10,000 BC, we'll draw some wheat or something like that. 10,000 BC, Neolithic Revolution. It takes us, at the earliest estimates, 130,000 years to reach the Neolithic Revolution. So human beings first appear about 150,000 BC in the plains of sub-Saharan Africa. By about 80,000 BC, human beings migrate out of Africa and begin to inhabit first the modern-day Middle East, moving along the coastline, and eventually by 60 to 50,000 BC inhabiting Southeast Asia. Then we have the move inward to modern-day China, Mongolia, modern-day Russia. Around 30, 40,000 BC, human beings move into Europe. And by about anywhere from 20 to 15,000 BC, human beings first migrate from Russia across the Bering Strait into North America. And within 1,000 years, human beings reach the southernmost tip of South America. Human beings represent one of the most successful migrations and populations within the history of biology. Within a very, well, biologically speaking, within a very short period of time, we inhabit the entire globe. So, globally then, around 10,000 BC, the Neolithic Revolution happens. So it takes a considerable, as far as our timeline goes, it takes a considerable amount of time to go from the appearance of the first human beings to the Neolithic Revolution. Now, when I say that civilization is the great accelerator of change, this is what I mean. So the Neolithic Revolution occurs around 10,000 BC. Sometime in between 5,000 and 2,500 BC, you have the building of the great monuments, the great superstructures of the past. So for example, you have the building of the pyramids, the building of Stonehenge. I can't draw Stonehenge, but you know what Stonehenge looks like, circle of giant rocks. So within a time span of only 5,000 to 7,000 years from the beginning of the Neolithic Revolution, we have the building of these superstructures. And we have civilizations complex enough. What this implies is that we have civilizations that exhibit a level of complexity that they're able to undertake these massive building projects. Civilizations that have reached a level of wealth, that have the appropriate political hierarchy, that have the appropriate religious hierarchy to go about undertaking the building of these structures. And government and religion is some of the first things that appear after the Neolithic Revolution. Once you reach a certain level of complexity, of course, you need somebody to govern this. You need somebody to mediate disputes between people. Okay, so some of the first social organizations that we have, the first social organization is government, immediately followed by, or perhaps preceding, can't quite put an exact timetable on these things, but you also have the establishment of organized religion. Now, religion's kind of always been there, but you have the establishment of organized religion. Then you have the building of these superstructures, which required an extraordinary amount of wealth and social stability. Then we reach the second major event. The second major event, which we're going to talk about today, is the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution beginning in England in the 17th century. It's when you have the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. And of course, by the 20th century, we're sending, well, first of all, with the Industrial Revolution is also going to represent a fundamental shift in the human condition and in human society, much in the same way that the Neolithic Revolution represents a shift from a hunting and gathering based lifestyle to an agricultural based lifestyle, and all that that lifestyle entails, such as the building of civilizations, the level of complexity required to build these superstructures, the level of complexity required to establish these massive nations of the past, such as the ancient Mesopotamian empires, the Egyptian Empire, eventually the Greek and the Roman Empire. The Industrial Revolution is going to have the same effect. Not only is it going to have the same effect, but it's going to further increase the development of technology. It's going to be a multiplier. Just as the Neolithic Revolution produced civilization, and civilization, as I said, is the great accelerator of change, that it speeds up human progress, the Industrial Revolution will further increase this speed. So 17th century, we have the first mechanized factories with the spinning jennies being able to produce massive amount of textiles. Within a period of 300 to 400 years, we're sending people to the moon. This is how quickly technology multiplies after the Industrial Revolution. So based on this kind of ridiculous timeline I've created, you can start to see then why these are the two most important events in human history as far as what sort of impact they have on us and you, on me and you, what sort of impact it has on society as a whole. Okay? Because remember, 140,000 years separates the appearance of the first human beings with the Neolithic Revolution. 12,000 years separates the Neolithic Revolution from the first man to walk on the moon. That's how great of an impact these two events have had. And so today we're going to talk primarily about the second event, the Industrial Revolution, and on the ways that the Industrial Revolution has impacted American society. So let me turn on the projector here. We'll get started. So, the Industrial Revolution is going to take place roughly from the 17th century to the 19th century. Some scholars would argue that the Industrial Revolution is still taking place. You have people that will distinguish between the first, second, and maybe even the third Industrial Revolution. Furthermore, nations are currently becoming industrialized, and this is what we mean when they say they're becoming industrialized. The United States has been industrialized. The United States is actually rather late to the game. The United States doesn't industrialize really until the 19th century, but the Industrial Revolution begins in the 17th century, and we could really say that in many ways it's still taking place. So we talked about this shift that it produced. So we went from the Neolithic Revolution, which is essentially what starts civilization as we know it, to the Industrial Revolution. So how did the Industrial Revolution change our lives? Well, look around you. Right now you are currently watching this lecture on a computer. How is this possible? The Industrial Revolution. Perhaps somebody calls you during this lecture on your cell phone. How is that possible? Industrial Revolution. How is it possible that you're sitting in a house that was probably constructed within a month or two? Industrial Revolution. Why are you coming to school at Savannah Tech? In order to pursue some particular career path that's a specialization in an area of work. Why did that happen? Industrial Revolution. Why do you get paid a certain amount of money per hour? Okay, you go to a job and you say, I'd like to work for you. The job says, great, I'll pay you $9 an hour. Okay, you're essentially selling an hour of your life to those people. So where did this start? It begins with the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution is going to shape our current life, how our life takes place, why you work for 3 hours and then get a 15-minute break, why you get paid weekly or maybe bi-weekly or in my case monthly. Okay, all of this has its origins, can trace its origins back to the Industrial Revolution. So historians then are in agreement. Most historians are in agreement. I can't say that everybody agrees, okay? But most historians are in agreement that the onset of the Industrial Revolution is the most important event in modern history. The Industrial Revolution is going to signify several major transitions in human history. This is just outlining what I'd said before. So, some major developments are going to take place. First of all, we have urbanization. Urbanization is just a fancy way of saying that people start to move to the cities. Why are they moving to the cities? Because typically speaking, the cities are going to be the houses of the factories. The cities are where the factory is going to be built, and of course the factory is going to be hiring from the cities. So people moving to the cities in order to pursue work. Second of all, we have a fundamental shift in the basic economic structure of society. And point number 2 ties in with point number 3, and then I'll elaborate. So a shift in the basic economic structure of society. Then a shift in the economic structure leads to a shift in the common elements of everyday life. So this is what happens. You go from people working on a farm to people working in a factory. Well, you might think, why does that matter? Well, on a farm, you make money according to the food that you produce, or you don't make money, right? If you, let's say you're growing potatoes, you grow enough potatoes to eat, and if you have any spare potatoes, that's all well and good, and so you sell it and get a few coins in your pockets. Sometimes you grow extra potatoes, sometimes you don't. But either way, you're on a farm, so you get to eat. The Industrial Revolution changes this. So for the very first time, people go to work in factories, and then at the end of the day, or at the end of the week, they get paid. So at the end of the day or the end of the week, you walk out with money in your pocket. This leads to an accumulation of wealth and sustained economic growth that has never happened before and previous to the Industrial Revolution. So for the very first time, ordinary people, people like you and me, are walking around with money to spend. And this has a domino effect. It changes every aspect of society. Okay, so the people that are walking around with money in their pocket, they're no longer farmers, so now they have to buy food. But in addition to food, they have to pay rent. They have to get an apartment, get a house, something like that. In addition to that, they want to be entertained, so they go to the local theater, they go to the local bar or the local pub. Okay, people are spending more money, and this is going to be the foundations for a consumer-based society. So every aspect of day-to-day life changes, and also for the very first time, we have sustained growth, meaning that for the first time in history, a child was almost guaranteed to make more money than their parents did. Not only was that child going to make more money with their parents, but their children was going to make more than them, and their children's children would make more than them. This is what I mean by sustained growth, the constant, the quality of life was consistently getting better. People were consistently making more money and had a higher standard of living than their parents did. Fourth of all, we move from hand production methods to machine production. So before, what would happen if you wanted a new shirt? You would go to Grandma and you'd say, "Hey Grandma, I need a new shirt. Would you mind making me one?" And she'd say, "Sure, Sonny," and she'd knit away, or I don't really know how people used to make shirts, so I'll just do this motion. They would just like do this and a shirt would pop out, right? But it would take Grandma like a month, let's say, to make your shirt. Hand production was really slow because it took a lot of time, skill, and effort. With these new machines, however, new clothing, new shirts, textiles could all be made within a day or an hour. Okay, so what once took months now can be done in a day, or eventually in a few minutes, right? Once these machines start to get increasingly more complicated and sophisticated. Number 5, new chemical manufacturing and iron production processes. Iron's going to become a very important material as far as construction goes during the Industrial Revolution, building houses, building factories, tools, all this other good stuff. 6, improve efficiency in water power and increasing use of steam power. Oftentimes these early factories needed to be built by streams or rivers. They would have a water wheel that would provide the factory with a source of energy. But eventually what happens is you have the development of steam power. Steam power really kind of starts off in the 18th century. James Watt perfects the steam engine. In the 19th century, it's an extremely popular invention. So from water power to steam power, eventually we'll get coal power. A lot of these factories will run off coal. Number 7 is the development of machine tools and the rise of the factory system. Rise of the factory system. So a factory wasn't just a place, okay? The factory is going to be the economic basis in society. So the factory system then kind of refers to this economic model of people of a primarily production and manufacturing centered economy, right? Where you're building stuff, whether it's shirts, whether it's tools or ships or whatever. You're building something. This is a manufacturing economy, okay? The factory is going to be the center of this. It's where it's all going to take place. And 8, a change from wood and other biofuels to coal. Coal is going to be used not only for factory use, but for personal use as well, to heat your own personal apartment. Now, I kind of hyped up the Industrial Revolution a lot and said that it's like the second greatest event in world history, and that's true, but it has a very humble beginning, or kind of a anticlimactic beginning. It begins with textiles, of all things. It begins with textiles in Britain. Textiles were the dominant industry of the Industrial Revolution in terms of its employment, output, and capital invested. Textile industry was also the first to employ modern production methods. So it's textiles that's going to start all this. It's textiles that's going to change society forever. And of course, this happens in Britain. I think I've already mentioned that. The Industrial Revolution begins in Britain. The most important technological innovations were British to begin with. It starts in Britain, but it quickly spreads throughout Europe. First to Germany and France. It'll eventually come to the United States, but a bit later. We get industrialization beginning in the 18th century, but it doesn't really kick off. It doesn't really start until the 19th century. And the Industrial Revolution is not just going to change quality of life. Okay, it's not just going to have an impact on how much money we're making, but as we'll also see, it's also going to influence social issues in America. Perhaps most importantly, the issue of slavery. But it's also going to give rise to new political issues, such as workers' rights. And we'll get to that here in a second. So industrialization then marks a shift to powered special purpose machineries, factories, and mass production. The iron and the textile industries, along with the development of the steam engine, played a central role in the Industrial Revolution, which saw improvements in not only transportation, but also communication. So I said that it has this sort of domino effect. And this is what I mean by that. The technology in the Industrial Revolution, it's constantly building off of itself. So the basic steam engine, the idea of the steam engine is conceived of in the 18th century. By the 19th century, we have a working steam engine that's attached to rail and creating the first locomotive that's able to carry tons and tons of raw materials, such as coal, over vast distances for the first time ever. And they're constantly improving on this. They're not content just to keep it the same. Okay, the steam engine's also, it's applied to rail technology, but it's also applied to naval technology. You have the first steamboats. First communication system is developed, and the telegraph. And people figure out a way through the telegraph to relay messages. And so you have the development of Morse code. The ability to transmit messages through a series of like little taps, and you'd have somebody at the other end translating these messages, right? To relay information in a matter of minutes. For them, that was completely just mind-blowing. For us, it's no big deal, right? Because we got these smartphones and we can like send a message, or we just get on our smartphone and communicates with a satellite, and we can send a text message to China in a matter of a few seconds. So we're like, oh, big whoop, they had the telegraph, right? But for them, this is amazing. Because typically speaking, right, we'll use the example of going from London to New York. Typically speaking, well, before steamboats, okay, this journey would take maybe a month and a half, if you had good weather. With the steamboat, a few weeks, right? To deliver a letter, though, would take a few months, because not only did you have to get the letter from your hand to the postmaster, but from the postmaster to the boat, from the boat to the other continent, from that continent to that postmaster, right? It's just a really long process. But with the telegraph, information could be relayed almost immediately. So one of the first things they do, it's pretty interesting, they just load up this boat with this just massive pile of telegraph line, and they go from London and they roll out this line across the bottom of the Atlantic all the way to New York, and the first telegraph is sent from one continent to the other. And it's just dumbfounding how fast this information is able to be conveyed. So the main features of the Industrial Revolution are they're all kind of tied together, kind of intertwined. The main features involved in the Industrial Revolution are technological, which we've been talking about, socioeconomic. You have the invention of these new machines as applied to factory work. You have an increase in wages, an increase in the standard of living, people spending their money on all these sorts of different things, which also impacts culture. Culture being the production, these people want to spend more money, so they're willing to go out and see plays. They eventually have the invention of motion pictures. Right? So you get the entertainment industry really kicks off. People are writing more, you have more newspapers that are able to be produced. Okay, so it's all kind of interconnected then. The Industrial Revolution changes, when I say it changes every aspect, I literally mean every aspect of society. Okay, so let's talk about some of the technological changes. Technological changes include the following. You have the introduction of new basic materials, primarily iron and steel. You have the use of new energy sources, including both fuels and motive power, beginning with coal and the steam engine. Eventually, in the latter half of the 19th century, people figure out how to harness electricity with the introduction of batteries. Then eventually petroleum and the internal combustion engine, the gas engine. Third, the invention of new machines such as the spinning jenny and the power loom, what's really going to kick off the textile production. These machines permitted increased production with relatively small expenditure of energy by the humans that were maintaining them. Fourth, I've already talked about quite a bit here, the new organization of work known as the factory system. Factory system is going to introduce specialization of labor. So in these factories, when you would go to work, you would have a specific job that you were going to do. Either you're